Marcus Thompson revved his motorcycle engine as he pulled into the quiet parking lot of Riverside Park. The 28-year-old construction worker had always believed that his leather jacket, heavy boots, and loud bike made him someone people should respect. He had a reputation in his neighborhood as a tough guy who didn't back down from anyone. Today was supposed to be just another ordinary Saturday afternoon ride through the city. The park was peaceful, with families enjoying picnics and children playing on the swings. Marcus parked his bike near the entrance and decided to walk around. He had been having a rough week at work, and his girlfriend Sarah had been nagging him about his attitude lately. She kept telling him that his need to prove himself to everyone was getting old, but Marcus didn't want to hear it. As he walked along the tree-lined path, Marcus noticed an older man sitting on a bench reading a newspaper. The man looked to be in his 50s, wearing simple jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. He had a calm, quiet presence about him that somehow irritated Marcus. There was something about people who seemed so at peace that made him want to disturb that peace. What really caught Marcus's attention were the two beautiful dogs lying peacefully at the man's feet. They were magnificent German shepherds with thick, shiny coats and alert expressions. One was slightly larger than the other, and both wore expensive-looking leather collars. The dogs seemed perfectly trained, lying calmly without leashes, occasionally looking up at their owner with devoted eyes. Marcus had never liked dogs much. As a child, he had been bitten by a neighbor's aggressive pit bull, and since then he had developed a fear that he covered up with aggression. Whenever he encountered dogs, especially large ones, his first instinct was to act tough to hide his nervousness. He would often make jokes about kicking them or scare them away with loud noises. The peaceful scene in front of him triggered something in Marcus. Here was this quiet man, probably some office worker or retiree, sitting there like he owned the place with his fancy dogs. Marcus felt an urge to show that he wasn't someone to be ignored. In his mind, he was just going to have a little fun, maybe get a reaction out of the boring guy on the bench. Walking closer, Marcus put on his most intimidating swagger. He had done this kind of thing before. Act tough around people who seemed soft, make them uncomfortable, then walk away feeling like he had proven something. It was a pattern that had served him well in his own mind, even though it had cost him friendships and respect from people who mattered. The man on the bench looked up briefly as Marcus approached, then returned to his newspaper. This dismissal annoyed Marcus even more. He was used to people being at least a little intimidated by his appearance. The fact that this stranger seemed completely uninterested in him felt like a challenge. Marcus stopped a few feet away from the bench and looked down at the two German shepherds. They were truly beautiful animals, clearly well cared for and healthy. For a moment he almost felt bad about what he was planning to do, but his need to get a reaction, to feel important, was stronger than any brief moment of conscience. "Nice dogs," Marcus said loudly, his voice carrying an edge that made a few nearby families look over with concern. The man glanced up again, nodded politely, and said a quiet "thank you" before returning to his reading. This calm response only fueled Marcus's desire to push further. The dogs sensed something was wrong. Their ears perked up slightly and they shifted positions, though they remained lying down. Their training was evident in how they waited for a command from their owner, rather than reacting to the stranger's aggressive energy. This level of discipline and control should have been a warning sign to Marcus, but he was too focused on his own agenda to notice. Marcus cracked his knuckles and took a step closer to the dogs. Several people in the area had started to pay attention to the situation, sensing that something unpleasant was about to happen. A mother with two young children quietly gathered her family and moved to a different area of the park. An elderly couple on a nearby bench exchanged worried glances. "I bet they're not as tough as they look," Marcus said, raising his voice so that others could hear. He wanted an audience for whatever was about to happen. In his twisted logic, having witnesses would make his display of dominance even more satisfying. He had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The quiet man on the bench slowly folded his newspaper and set it aside. For the first time, he gave Marcus his full attention. There was something in his eyes that should have made Marcus reconsider, but the biker was too caught up in his own performance to notice the warning signs. The man's calm demeanor hadn't changed. But there was now a subtle tension in his posture that suggested he was preparing for whatever might come next. Marcus looked down at the two German shepherds one more time. They were watching him now, their intelligent eyes tracking his every movement. Still, they remained perfectly still, waiting for their owner's command. The level of trust and communication between the man and his dogs was remarkable, but Marcus saw it as weakness rather than strength. What Marcus didn't know was that he was about to discover just how wrong he could be about judging people by their appearance. The quiet man on the bench was not at all what he seemed, and those two perfectly trained German shepherds were about to show Marcus exactly why their calm confidence was so well-deserved. His simple attempt at intimidation was about to turn into a life-changing encounter that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about strength, respect, and what it really meant to be tough. Marcus decided he had waited long enough for a reaction. The quiet man's calm behavior was starting to make him look foolish in front of the other park visitors, and that was the last thing his ego could handle. He had built his entire identity around being someone others feared or respected, and this stranger's indifference was eating at him. "You know what I think about dogs like these?" Marcus said, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. He was now standing directly in front of the bench, casting a shadow over the man and his two German shepherds. "I think they're all bark and no bite, just like most people who hide behind their pets." The man slowly stood up from the bench, folding his newspaper neatly and placing it in his back pocket. He was shorter than Marcus had expected, probably around 5 feet 8 inches. But there was something about the way he moved that was different from ordinary people. Every motion seemed calculated and controlled, like he was always ready for action even when appearing completely relaxed. "I think you should move along," the man said quietly, his voice carrying a subtle accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. There was no anger in his tone, no fear, just a simple statement delivered with absolute certainty. "My dogs and I are just trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon." This reasonable response infuriated Marcus even more. He had expected either fear or aggression, something he could work with. Instead, he got calm professionalism, which made him feel like a child having a tantrum. The small crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was making him feel exposed and foolish, which only pushed him to escalate further. "Oh, so now you want to talk?" Marcus sneered, taking another step closer. "Maybe your precious dogs need to learn some manners, and maybe you do too." He raised his right foot slightly, making a mock kicking motion toward the larger of the two German shepherds. "How about I teach them what happens when they don't show proper respect?" The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Both dogs instantly came to attention, rising smoothly to their feet in perfect synchronization. Their ears were forward, their bodies tense and ready, but they still didn't move from their positions. They were waiting for a command, their eyes fixed not on Marcus but on their owner. The level of discipline was extraordinary, but what was even more impressive was the absolute confidence they showed in their training. The man's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. To most observers, he still looked calm and relaxed, but Marcus suddenly felt like he was standing in front of something very dangerous. It was like the feeling you get when you realize you've wandered too close to the edge of a cliff, or when you hear a rattlesnake's warning just a little too late. "Last warning," the man said, and this time there was steel in his voice. "Walk away. Now." Marcus had come too far to back down, especially with people watching. In his mind, backing down now would be admitting weakness, and that was something he couldn't allow. He had spent years building a reputation as someone who didn't take orders from anyone, and he wasn't about to start now. "Or what?" Marcus challenged, raising his voice so everyone in the area could hear. "You and your little pet's going to try to scare me? I've dealt with tougher guys than you, old man." He made another mock kicking motion, this time getting closer to the dogs. Maybe these mutts need to learn what real fear looks like. What happened next would be burned into Marcus's memory forever. The man made a small gesture with his left hand, barely visible to anyone watching, and both German shepherds moved into what Marcus would later learn was called a ready position. They didn't bark, growl, or show any signs of traditional aggressive dog behavior. Instead, they simply repositioned themselves with the fluid precision of trained soldiers. The larger dog moved to Marcus's right side while the smaller one circled to his left. They didn't rush or attack, but their movement was so smooth and coordinated that Marcus suddenly found himself surrounded before he realized what was happening. The dogs maintained a perfect distance, close enough to act instantly, but far enough, away to avoid any clumsy swipes Marcus might attempt. For the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus felt genuine fear. These weren't ordinary pets or even typical guard dogs. These animals moved like they had been trained by professionals for serious work. Their eyes never left him, tracking his every breath and muscle twitch with the intensity of predators who had found their prey. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking slightly as he realized he might have made a serious mistake. The dogs weren't barking or snarling like the aggressive animals he was used to encountering. Instead, they were silent and focused, which was somehow much more terrifying. The man took a single step forward, and Marcus could see that his earlier assessment had been completely wrong. This wasn't some soft office worker or harmless retiree. The way he moved, the way he carried himself, the absolute confidence in his voice, all suggested someone with serious training and experience in situations much more dangerous than a park confrontation. "You wanted to know what happens when someone threatens my dogs," the man said, his voice still calm but now carrying an unmistakable edge of menace. "These two have been trained to protect and serve. They've worked in situations you couldn't imagine, faced dangers you've never dreamed of, and right now they're wondering whether you represent a threat that needs to be neutralized." Marcus tried to take a step backward, but the moment he moved, both dogs adjusted their positions accordingly. They were herding him, controlling his movement without ever making direct contact. It was like being caught in an invisible cage that moved with him no matter which direction he tried to go. The small crowd of park visitors had grown larger, but they were keeping their distance. Some were taking pictures or videos with their phones, while others were calling what Marcus hoped was park security rather than the police. He was starting to realize that his simple attempt at intimidation had turned into something much more serious. "Look, man, I was just joking around," Marcus said, his tough guy facade beginning to crumble. "I wasn't really going to hurt your dogs, I was just messing with you." But even as he said the words, he knew they sounded hollow and unconvincing. The man studied Marcus for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The dogs maintained their positions, still silent and focused, waiting for instructions that might or might not come. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Marcus was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into something far beyond his ability to control. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone around him could hear it. The two German shepherds continued their silent vigil, positioned perfectly to prevent any escape route he might consider. Their training was unlike anything he had ever encountered, and their owner's calm confidence was becoming more unnerving by the second. "Just joking around?" the man repeated, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Threatening to kick someone's dogs is your idea of humor?" He took another measured step forward, and Marcus instinctively tried to step back only to find one of the dogs had anticipated his movement and blocked his path. The larger dog, which Marcus now noticed, had several small scars along its muzzle that suggested real combat experience, moved closer to his right leg, not close enough to touch but close enough that Marcus could feel the animal's body heat. The dog's breathing was steady and controlled, like an athlete waiting for the starting gun. "Please," Marcus said, his voice now openly shaking. "I get it, okay? Your dogs are well trained. You've made your point. Can we just call this whole thing off?" He looked around desperately at the growing crowd, hoping someone might intervene, but the other park visitors seemed content to watch from a safe distance. The man tilted his head slightly, studying Marcus like he was trying to solve an interesting puzzle. "You know what's funny about bullies?" he said conversationally. "They always think everyone else is as weak as they are. They can't imagine that someone might actually be dangerous without needing to advertise it." A middle-aged woman in the crowd suddenly gasped and pointed at the man. "Oh my God," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I know who that is. That's Jason Statham." Several other people immediately pulled out their phones and started taking pictures and videos with renewed interest. Marcus felt his stomach drop into his boots. Jason Statham, the action movie star. The guy who did his own stunts and had trained with real military and law enforcement personnel for his roles. The man who had worked with professional dog trainers and tactical experts for dozens of films. Marcus had just threatened to kick the dogs belonging to someone who could probably end him without breaking a sweat. Jason Statham? Marcus whispered, his face going pale. The actor? He looked around at the crowd, which was now openly excited about the celebrity sighting, though they were still keeping their distance because of the tense situation. Jason nodded slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That's right. And these, he gestured to his two dogs, are Rex and Titan. They're retired military working dogs. Rex here, he indicated the larger dog, served 3 tours in Afghanistan with special forces. Titan did 2 tours in Iraq with bomb disposal units. They've saved more lives than most people ever will. Marcus felt like he was going to be sick. Military working dogs, retired combat veterans. He had threatened to kick 2 of the most highly trained and dangerous animals in the world, and their owner was a man famous for playing characters who could take down entire criminal organizations single-handedly. They're trained to detect explosives, track enemies through hostile territory, and neutralize threats to their handlers. Jason continued, his voice still calm but with an edge that suggested Marcus was in more trouble than he had ever imagined. When I adopted them, I promised I would never let anyone hurt or threaten them again. They've served their country with honor, and they deserve to live in peace. Rex, the larger dog, took a small step closer to Marcus, and the biker could see the intelligence in the animal's eyes. This wasn't just a pet or even a guard dog. This was a professional who had faced enemy fire, saved soldiers' lives, and earned his retirement through service and sacrifice. The small scars on his face suddenly took on a whole new meaning. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and for the first time, he actually meant it. I didn't know. I was just being stupid. I have problems, you know. I get angry and I take it out on people who don't deserve it. The words came tumbling out as he realized the full scope of his mistake. Jason studied him for another long moment. Problems, he repeated. What kind of problems make someone think it's okay to threaten innocent animals? Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes, which was humiliating given the crowd of people recording everything. I got bit by a dog when I was a kid, really badly. Ever since then, I get scared around big dogs, but I cover it up by acting tough. I know it's stupid, I know it's wrong, but I do it anyway. The admission seemed to hang in the air. Several people in the crowd exchanged glances, and Marcus could see some of them lowering their phones. His vulnerability was unexpected, and it was changing the dynamic of the situation in ways he hadn't anticipated. Fear, Jason said thoughtfully. That's something Rex and Titan understand very well. They've been afraid many times. The difference is they learned to work through their fear instead of letting it control them. He made another small gesture, and both dogs relaxed slightly, though they remained alert and ready. I don't know how to do that, Marcus admitted. I've been angry for so long I don't know how to be anything else. My girlfriend keeps telling me I need help, but I thought I could handle it myself. He looked down at his hands, which were shaking slightly. Jason was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. The crowd was still watching, but the mood had shifted from excitement about a potential confrontation to something more complex. Here was a famous action star, 2 heroic military dogs, and a troubled young man having what appeared to be a genuine moment of self-reflection. These dogs have PTSD, Jason said finally. They've seen things that would break most people, but they've learned to trust again, to find peace again with help from people who understand trauma. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes. Maybe you should consider that there are people who understand your kind of trauma too. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He had come to the park looking for someone to dominate, someone to make feel small so he could feel big. Instead, he had encountered someone who had shown him what real strength looked like, and it wasn't anything like what he had imagined. Jason made a subtle hand signal, and both Rex and Titan immediately moved back to their original positions beside the bench, lying down in perfect synchronization. The demonstration of control was flawless, but what impressed Marcus even more was how the dogs seemed to relax the moment their owner indicated the threat had passed. They trusted his judgment completely. "You want to know what real courage looks like?" Jason asked, settling back onto the bench. The crowd was still watching, but many people had put away their phones, sensing that something more important than a celebrity encounter was taking place. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. He was still shaking slightly from the adrenaline and the realization of how badly he had misjudged the situation. Real courage is admitting when you're wrong. It's facing your fears instead of lashing out at innocent people and animals. It's getting help when you need it, even when your pride tells you not to. Jason gestured for Marcus to sit on the other end of the bench. "These dogs taught me that." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then slowly sat down, making sure to keep plenty of distance between himself and the two German shepherds. Up close, he could see more details about their condition and training. Their coats were perfectly maintained, their muscles well developed, and their eyes held an alertness that spoke of years of professional discipline. "When I first met Rex and Titan," Jason continued, "they were both struggling with civilian life. Rex would have nightmares and wake up growling at shadows. Titan was so hypervigilant that he couldn't relax even during feeding time. They had served their country with honor, but the transition to retirement was nearly impossible for them." Marcus looked at the dogs with new understanding. "What happened to them? I mean, how did they get better?" "Patience, professional help, and most importantly, they had to learn to trust again." Jason reached down and gently stroked Rex's head. The dog leaned into the touch, showing a side of his personality that was completely different from the tactical precision he had displayed moments earlier. It took months of work with veterinary behaviorists, former military handlers, and specialized trainers. The larger dog, Rex, seemed to sense that the conversation had shifted to include him. He raised his head and looked directly at Marcus, but this time there was no threat in his gaze. Instead, there was something that looked almost like curiosity, as if he was trying to understand this strange human who had gone from aggressive to vulnerable so quickly. "The thing about trauma," Jason said, "is that it makes you see enemies everywhere, even when they don't exist. These dogs learned to distinguish between real threats and false alarms. They learned that not every stranger was dangerous. Not every loud noise was an explosion. Not every sudden movement was an attack." Marcus felt like Jason was describing his own life. How many times had he reacted to imagined slights or perceived disrespect? How many confrontations had he started because he assumed someone was trying to make him look weak or stupid? "I do that," Marcus admitted quietly. "I see threats everywhere. Someone looks at me wrong or doesn't show me respect, and I immediately think they're trying to humiliate me, so I strike first." He looked down at his hands again. "I never thought about it as trauma before. I just thought I was being tough." "The toughest thing these dogs ever did was admit they needed help," Jason said. "Rex here was so proud and independent that he refused treats from new people for weeks. He thought accepting help was a sign of weakness." Sound familiar? A small laugh escaped from Marcus, surprising him. "Yeah, it does." He looked at Rex with new respect. "So how did you get them to accept help?" "Time and consistency. I showed up every day, whether they wanted me to or not. I didn't push. I didn't force anything. But I was there. Eventually, they started to trust that I wasn't going anywhere, that I wasn't going to hurt them or abandon them when things got difficult." Marcus thought about his girlfriend, Sarah, who had been trying to help him deal with his anger issues for months. How many times had she suggested counseling or anger management classes? How many times had he brushed her off, insisting he could handle his problems alone? "The people in your life who care about you," Jason continued, as if reading his thoughts, "they're not trying to make you weak when they suggest getting help. They're trying to make you stronger. Just like the trainers who worked with Rex and Titan weren't trying to break them down, they were trying to build them back up." Titan, the smaller dog, had been quietly observing the conversation. Now he slowly stood up and took a few careful steps toward Marcus. The biker tensed slightly, but Jason's calm presence and Rex's relaxed posture helped him stay still. "Titan wants to say hello," Jason explained. "He's always been the more social of the two. but he won't approach unless you're comfortable with it. He's learned to read human body language very well. Marcus looked at the approaching dog, feeling his old fear starting to rise, but this time, instead of covering it with aggression, he tried to be honest about it. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know it's stupid, given everything that just happened, but I'm still scared of dogs." "That's not stupid at all," Jason said gently. "Fear is a normal response to trauma. The question is what you do with that fear. Do you let it control you or do you work through it?" Marcus took a deep breath and held out his hand, palm up, the way he had seen people do in movies. His hand was shaking slightly, but he kept it extended. Titan approached slowly, sniffed his hand carefully, then gently licked his fingers. The contact was brief and gentle, nothing like the aggressive bite that had traumatized Marcus as a child. Titan's tongue was warm and his breath smelled like the high-quality dog treats that Jason probably fed him. After the brief greeting, Titan sat down at a respectful distance, clearly waiting to see if Marcus wanted more interaction. "He likes you," Jason observed. "Dogs are excellent judges of character. They can sense when someone is genuinely trying to change." Marcus stared at his hand where Titan had licked it, amazed by how normal the interaction had felt. "That wasn't so bad," he said, sounding surprised. "I mean, I was terrified, but it wasn't bad." "Fear and courage aren't opposites," Jason said. "Courage is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You just showed more courage in the last few minutes than you probably have in years." The crowd around them had gradually dispersed, with most people realizing that the dramatic confrontation they had expected to witness had turned into something much more personal and meaningful. A few individuals remained at a respectful distance, but they seemed more interested in the positive interaction between Marcus and the dogs than in getting social media content. "You know," Jason said, pulling out his phone. "I have the contact information for some people who specialize in helping. Veterans and first responders deal with trauma and anger issues. They work with humans the same way the behavioral specialists worked with Rex and Titan." Marcus looked up with interest. "You really think they could help someone like me? I'm not a veteran or a first responder. I'm just a construction worker with anger problems." "Trauma doesn't care about your job title," Jason replied. "And the techniques that help military working dogs transition to civilian life work just as well for humans who are struggling with similar issues. The principles are the same: patience, consistency, professional guidance, and a willingness to trust the process." Rex had been lying quietly during their conversation, but now he stood up and moved closer to Marcus. This time, instead of the tactical precision he had shown earlier, his movement was casual and friendly. He settled down right next to the bench where Marcus was sitting, close enough that the man could feel his warmth. "That's remarkable," Marcus said, looking down at the large dog. "A few minutes ago, he was ready to take me down, and now he's acting like we're old friends." "Dogs live in the moment," Jason explained. "They don't hold grudges the way humans do. Once Rex determined that you weren't actually a threat, that you were just someone struggling with fear and pain, his whole attitude changed. He's actually trying to comfort you now." Marcus tentatively reached down and touched Rex's head. The dog's fur was thick and soft, and he leaned into the contact just as he had with Jason. The simple act of petting the animal was surprisingly calming, and Marcus could feel some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I can't believe I was ready to kick him," Marcus said quietly. "Looking at him now, seeing how gentle he is, I feel sick about what I almost did." His voice was filled with genuine remorse. "The important thing is that you stopped yourself," Jason pointed out, "and more importantly, you're willing to look at why you wanted to do it in the first place. That's the beginning of real change." Titan had been watching the interaction between Marcus and Rex with apparent approval. Now he moved closer as well, settling down on Marcus's other side. The biker found himself sitting on a park bench with two of the most highly trained dogs in the world flanking him like bodyguards, except instead of protecting others from him, they seemed to be protecting him from his own demons. "This is surreal," Marcus said with a nervous laugh. "This morning I was just another angry guy on a motorcycle, And now I'm getting therapy advice from Jason Statham while his military dogs comfort me. Jason smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Marcus had seen from him. Life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, when you need to be there. Maybe you came to this park today not to cause trouble, but to find help. Marcus considered this possibility. My girlfriend Sarah has been begging me to get counseling for months. She says I'm going to push everyone away if I don't deal with my anger. I keep telling her I can handle it myself, but obviously I can't. What? Are you afraid will happen if you get help? Jason asked. The question caught Marcus off guard. He had to think about it for a moment before answering. I guess I'm afraid they'll tell me I'm broken, that I'm weak, that I'm not the man I think I am. Rex was afraid of the same thing, Jason said, stroking the dog's ears. He was so used to being the strongest, most capable member of his unit that the idea of needing help felt like failure to him. But getting help didn't make him weak, it made him whole again. Marcus looked down at both dogs, who seemed completely at peace despite their traumatic pasts and the confrontation that had started this whole encounter. How long did it take? For them to get better, I mean. It's not about getting better, Jason corrected gently. It's about learning to manage and work with what you've experienced. Rex and Titan will always be former military working dogs. Their training, their instincts, their experiences will always be part of who they are. But they've learned to channel those qualities in positive ways. Like how they handled me today, Marcus realized. They could have hurt me, but they chose restraint instead. Exactly. They used their training to control a situation without causing unnecessary harm. That's what real strength looks like. Marcus pulled out his own phone and looked at it thoughtfully. I should probably call Sarah. Let her know that I'm ready to try getting help. She's going to be shocked. The people who love us are usually more patient than we give them credit for, Jason said. They're waiting for us to be ready to accept the help they've been offering all along. A young park ranger approached them cautiously, clearly recognizing Jason but unsure about the situation. Is everything all right here? She asked. We had some reports of a disturbance. Everything's fine now, Jason assured her. Just a misunderstanding that turned into a learning experience. The ranger looked at Marcus, who was sitting peacefully between the two large dogs, then back at Jason. Okay, well, as long as everyone's safe and happy. She started to walk away, then turned back. Mr. Statham, I just wanted to say thank you for your work with veteran animals. My brother served in Afghanistan, and your advocacy for military working dogs means a lot to our family. After she left, Marcus looked at Jason with new curiosity. You really do this kind of work? Helping military animals? Among other things, Jason replied. When you have a platform, you have a responsibility to use it for something meaningful. Rex and Titan taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, whether they have 2 legs or 4. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same park where his life had changed forever. The autumn leaves were falling, creating a colorful carpet along the walking paths, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. He was no longer alone. Sarah walked beside him, her hand intertwined with his, and she was smiling in a way she hadn't smiled in years. The anger management counseling and therapy sessions had been difficult, but they had worked. Marcus had learned to recognize his triggers, to understand the difference between real threats and imagined ones, and most importantly, to ask for help when he needed it. Are you nervous? Sarah asked as they approached the familiar bench where Marcus had encountered Jason Statham and his 2 remarkable dogs. A little, Marcus admitted. But it's good nervous, you know? Like when you're about to do something important. He was carrying a small bouquet of flowers and a handwritten letter, both intended for the man who had changed his perspective on strength, courage, and what it really meant to be tough. They didn't have to wait long. At exactly 3:00, Jason appeared on the walking path with Rex and Titan trotting beside him. The dogs looked as magnificent as ever, their coats glossy in the afternoon sunlight, their movements displaying the same confident precision that had impressed and terrified Marcus months earlier. When Rex spotted Marcus, his ears perked up and His tail began to wag slightly. Titan showed similar recognition, and both dogs seemed genuinely pleased to see the man they had helped transform. It was a remarkable display of canine memory and emotional intelligence. "Marcus," Jason said with a warm smile as he approached. "You look different, better." It was true. Marcus had gained some healthy weight. His posture was more relaxed, and most importantly, his eyes no longer held the constant anger and defensiveness that had defined him for so many years. He looked like a man who had found peace with himself. "I feel different too," Marcus replied, then gestured to Sarah. "Jason, this is my girlfriend Sarah. Sarah, this is Jason, and these are Rex and Titan." He paused, looking down at the two dogs with genuine affection. "The three of them saved my life." Sarah stepped forward and shook Jason's hand warmly. "I can't thank you enough for what you did. Marcus told me about everything that happened here, and I honestly don't know where we'd be if you hadn't shown him what real strength looks like." Rex approached Marcus slowly, his tail wagging more enthusiastically now. Without hesitation, Marcus knelt down and allowed the large German Shepherd to greet him properly. The contrast with their first meeting was extraordinary. Where there had once been fear and aggression, there was now mutual respect and genuine affection. "How's the counseling going?" Jason asked as they all settled onto the bench in the surrounding grass area. "It's been hard work," Marcus said honestly, scratching behind Rex's ears. "There were days when I wanted to quit, when I thought it was easier to just be angry at everything. But my therapist, Dr. Martinez, she helped me understand that anger was just fear wearing a disguise." Titan had positioned himself next to Sarah, who was delighted to meet the famous military working dogs. "They're so gentle," she marveled. "Marcus told me how intimidating they were that first day, but they seem like completely different animals now." "They're the same animals," Jason explained, "but they're responding to a completely different energy from Marcus. Dogs are incredibly sensitive to human emotions and intentions. When Marcus was aggressive and fearful, they responded accordingly. Now that he's calm and genuine, they can relax and show their true personalities." Marcus pulled out the letter he had written and handed it to Jason. "I wanted you to have this. It's a thank you note, but it's also a promise. I've been volunteering at the local animal shelter, working with dogs who have behavioral issues. I figured if Rex and Titan could overcome their trauma, maybe I could help other animals do the same." Jason opened the letter and read it silently, his expression growing more moved with each paragraph. When he finished, he looked up at Marcus with genuine pride. "This is remarkable. You're giving back, helping others the way you were helped. That's the best kind of healing." "There's more," Sarah added, unable to contain her excitement. "Tell him about the program." Marcus looked slightly embarrassed but pleased. "Well, Dr. Martinez introduced me to some people who work with veterans and first responders. They're starting a pilot program that pairs people dealing with PTSD and anger issues with rescue dogs who need rehabilitation. The idea is that healing together creates a stronger bond for both the human and the animal." "That's brilliant," Jason said, clearly impressed. "Have you been accepted into the program?" "Actually, I'm going to be one of the trainers," Marcus said, his voice filled with pride. "They want people who have been through the process themselves, who understand what it's like to struggle with trauma and anger. I'll be working with a former military explosives expert and his new partner, a German Shepherd mix who was abandoned and has trust issues." Rex seemed to understand that he was being discussed, because he moved closer to Marcus and rested his large head on the man's knee. The gesture was so trusting and affectionate that Sarah actually got tears in her eyes. "6 months ago I would have kicked this dog," Marcus said quietly, stroking Rex's head. "Today, he's teaching me about forgiveness and second chances. It's amazing how much can change when you're willing to admit you need help." Jason stood up and walked over to his motorcycle, which was parked nearby. Marcus hadn't noticed it before, but now he could see that it was a beautiful, well-maintained machine that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. Jason returned with a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, handing the package to Marcus. "Open it." Inside was a beautiful leather collar with a nameplate that read, "Courage." Marcus looked up questioningly. "It's for your new partner," Jason explained. When you start working with that German Shepherd mix, he's going to need a name that reflects his journey from fear to strength. Just like you did. Marcus held the collar carefully, understanding the significance of the gift. Courage, he repeated. I like that. It's not about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. Exactly, Jason said. And that's what you did 6 months ago. You were terrified, but you chose honesty over aggression. You chose growth over pride. You chose to get help instead of continuing to hurt yourself and others. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the park. Other visitors were walking their dogs, playing with their children, and enjoying the peaceful evening atmosphere. Marcus realized that he was now part of that peaceful scene instead of being someone who disrupted it. I should probably get going, Jason said, calling Rex and Titan to his side. But Marcus, I want you to know how proud I am of the work you've done. It takes real courage to change your life, and you've done something remarkable. As Jason prepared to leave, Marcus stood up and extended his hand for a handshake. But Jason surprised him by pulling him into a brief, sincere hug instead. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. The potential was always there, Jason replied. You just needed someone to help you find it. As they watched Jason walk away with Rex and Titan, Sarah took Marcus's hand and squeezed it gently. So, are you ready to go home and start preparing for your new job? Marcus looked around the park one more time, remembering the angry, frightened man who had come here 6 months ago looking for trouble. That man was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from helping others rather than hurting them. Yeah, he said, smiling at Sarah. I'm ready. They walked back toward Marcus's motorcycle, but this time he wasn't riding away from his problems. He was riding toward a future where his experiences, both good and bad, could be used to help others find their own path from fear to courage. And somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of Jason's motorcycle as the actor and his 2 heroic dogs headed home, their work for the day complete.